If you're interested in learning more about BetAngel, its tools and the opportunities they present, then why not visit betangel.com today and download a free trial.
So I have a sheet here. I have to thank Liam, who posted on the forum, and he does every year with all of this data. I do collect this data, but I'm not as organised as our forum members, it would appear, because I never seem to have the time to organise and sort it properly and all of that. So I am incredibly grateful to all the forum members that post up data, information, spreadsheets, all of these things that help me and others analyse what's going on with the market. But I thought it would be interesting to talk you through some of the figures. I've had to put them on a spreadsheet here because I can't possibly remember all of this. So I apologise if I'm glancing away from you repeatedly as I discuss this. But there are loads of information contained in it. Basically what we've got here is a load of data on every single market traded and the amount it turned over. There is more data behind that, but just the top line turnover figures can tell you a lot and are quite interesting in terms of the way that they describe what's going on in the markets. But if we start at the top level, if I take basically the data, I've got data going back to 2004, but this data is from 2007 to 2016. So we've got 9 years worth of data here. The interesting thing about these markets is I've split them pre-off, money matched before the event goes in play and in play, to give you some sense of perspective and see the differences between individual sports. But have a guess what the biggest sport is on Betfair. Have a guess. And the winner is horse racing. And this goes back years ago from when I got interested in trading different markets. I didn't trade horse racing to start with, but the thing that went whoop, whoop, whoop in front of my eyes was just the enormous amount of turnover that you see on racing. So if you look at the overall pre-off between 2007 and 2016, there's been 175.5 billion matched across all the sports that were on this spreadsheet. And of that, horse racing was 55% of pre-off money here. So horse racing represents, 95 billion over that particular period. It's funny, I'm looking at these figures and I'm thinking, wow. and I had to double check it then, 95 billion. And that's why horse racing interests me. If you can work out horse racing and strategies that work within that, then, it's a big market. Horse racing is the top pre-off event by matched bet volume. So what do you think the second one is? Second one is, well, it says soccer here. Second one is football, stroke soccer for those viewers watching in other countries. 50 billion. And if we go to number 3, number 3 is tennis. And if we read down that list, it goes horse racing, 95 billion, soccer, 50 billion, tennis, 10 billion, greyhound racing, 6 billion, cricket is 3.6 billion, and then we've got American basketball, American football, rugby union, golf, and then other. Other is 4.5 billion or thereabouts, accounts for about 3% of turnover. So you can really see, racing, football, tennis are the big three. Those are the big markets in terms of pre-off activity. And you notice I've said pre-off activity because if you look at in-play is completely different. In-play looks totally different. So we've got 175 billion matched since 2007. But if you look in-play, 275 billion. So, it's a huge market. And as always with horse racing, I've noted over many years that there's obviously less done in play on horse racing than there is done pre-off. And the pre-off market's quite volatile and variable, so naturally that generates a lot more activity. If you look at a tennis match or football, there's hardly any volatility, so not much goes on there really, and it's all about the in-play. It's all about the in-play, as Ray would say. So if you look at the split, it's a little bit different on the in-play market. So if we look at in-play matched bet volume, football has done 100 billion basically, and that's the number one. That's about 37% of all in-play markets. Tennis is 80 billion, Cricket, 51 billion. And then you get to horse racing. But horse racing historically is only, I say only, about 20% of the match bet turnover on horse racing is in play. And that's actually remained remarkably consistent over a number of years. I can't ever remember a year where it wasn't 20%. So we're saying 80% of the money occurs before the off, 20% in play. So yeah, it's interesting. And talking of that, if you actually look at the percentage of turnover that is in play versus the total matched turnover, horse racing is quite low. It's 20%, but for the reasons that I've just explained. But if you go in reverse order and look at the sports where the majority of money is matched in play, I wonder if you can guess them. So horse racing is the lowest on 20%. 20% of turnover on horse racing is in play from the total amount matched before the off and in play. If you understand where I'm coming from, I think you do. So which is the next lowest? I think the answer may surprise you. It's actually football. So football, 67% of the money is matched in play versus pre-off. So you can see 2/3 of the money comes in play, 1/3 before the match has started. So, you know, it's quite an active market before the off, but much more active in play. The next one up the list, and we're talking just percentages here, not matched bets turnover, we're just saying the proportion of money matched in play versus pre-off, is golf. And that sort of makes sense because obviously not much happens before a golf tournament starts, but loads happens once it gets underway. And then we have basketball, which is a bit of an anomaly because it's quite a small sport in terms of turnover, but most of it's done in play. Quite obviously why that would be the case. And then we get to the biggies. And number two, I wonder if you can guess the number one and number two sports for the amount of turnover done in play versus before the off. So number two is, have a guess? Tennis. Tennis does nearly 90%, 88% of all money matched on tennis is in play. So what is the number one? What is the biggest sport that turns over enormous amounts of money in play and doesn't do that much before the off? Maybe you can guess this. I think maybe perhaps you will get this. It's cricket. So cricket is a massive market in play and actually retrospectively doesn't do that much before the off. So, you know, that's quite interesting. And in fact, if you actually look, I've done in play versus pre-event here because this is a really interesting graph which will appear in front of you magically now. If we go back to 2007, we're looking at about 48%, just below 50% of money. You know, there was an equal amount matched in play and before the off. But look at what happens to the graph. It's going up and up and up and up, and it's plateaued a bit, but you know, it is going up. And my theory behind this, and it's totally a theory and utterly objective, is that bookmakers and other people can create offers that entice people into the market before the off, but it's very hard to match the in-play proposition. Getting liquidity into in-play markets and offering competitive prices works beautifully well on the exchange, not so well with a traditional bookmaker. So I think that while other traditional betting mediums can sort of compete with exchanges, they never will, but they've managed to find clever ways of doing it. And also Betfair's focus, you know, they're dragging a lot of people in via the sportsbook, and that money isn't reaching the exchange any longer, is changing the way that the market looks. But also I think the exchange is becoming an in-play mechanism a lot, you know, for sports like football and tennis and cricket and those sort of things. And it's still in play for racing, but obviously the racing market before the off is huge as well. But it's just changing the mix. That's what I'm trying to say, you know. We're not saying that one thing is in decline or another, although I suspect there is, which I'll talk about in a second. But if you look at the mix of things, that mix is changing over time, and more stuff is being done in play in big volumes as well. The interesting thing is when you look at these total figures, you begin to realise that just how much money the exchanges are saving traditional punters. Because if you add up some of these figures, you know, if we do the 175 billion in pre-matched, pre-off volume, can you imagine a bookmaker would probably want about 10% on that, maybe a bit more. That's 17 billion. And I reckon on an exchange you're going to be talking maybe half a billion maybe has been lost on the exchange versus 17.5 with a traditional bookmaker, if you look at it on equal terms. That's why exchange is good. If you ever ponder or worry about the benefits of exchanges and your participation on them and other people's participation on it, it's still so much better than a bookmaker. And your participation in that market is helping fuel that and helping people lose less money effectively if they are net losers, because of course you do get winners on the exchange. But yeah, you know, that growth is very interesting. If you break it down to individual levels, we can look at the amount of in-play turnover on individual sports, and if you look at how that's changed, it's quite an interesting picture is developing, because if you look at in-play on football, stroke soccer, as it will say on the graph, because that's the way it comes out, the amount of money that's being bet in play on football has increased by nearly 3 billion between 2011 and 2016, so over the last 5 years. If you look at cricket, that's increased by how much is that? Yeah, 7.6 billion. That's increased in 5 years. It's massive. It was 4 billion, it's now approaching 12 billion. But if you look at some of the other sports like tennis, horse racing, they've declined a bit. But you can see there's massive growth in play on football and cricket, especially cricket. Cricket, as I've mentioned before on the blog, has exploded. It's really taken off of late. If you look at the pre-off totals, then what you'll find is that football, stroke soccer, has been in decline. And I think if you look at the market, a very large online bookmaker that has lots of adverts on in between football matches, they've been pricing their book at about 103%. So Betfair have responded with similar offers on their sports book, and I think that that's dragged some of the volume away pre-off on the football from the exchange to the sports book, and and probably been dragged off the site completely elsewhere because of those sort of competitive pricing. So if you look at that in the last 5 years, that's dropped by nearly $1 billion. The amount of money matched before the off on football matches. But you can tell that, you can see it in the market. Some of the secondary markets are very weak. Tennis has declined as well, but most of the others have been increasing. I'll bring up a graph and show you all of the individual sports. And the takeaways from that are greyhound racing over the last 5 years has ballooned quite significantly, and somehow I'd missed that. I have traded greyhounds before, but because they're not as liquid as racing markets and other things, I hadn't really paid it that much attention, and I was profitable at it, but just not profitable enough, basically. I couldn't, you know, make an absolute fortune. But I think I may return to that. I may go back and have another look at that if these turnover figures, and especially over the last year, have grown fairly significantly. So it's time to pay attention back to that and have another look at it. Racing's grown, cricket has grown before the off, and of course, you know, one of the big, because of Trump and Brexit last year, political betting went absolutely bananas. In 2011 it did 1.3 million, last year it did 221 million. Next year it will probably be back to 2 million or so. But yeah, so some sports have grown, some have declined. There are probably some reasons behind that. But hopefully all of that data that I've thrown off, I know there's a lot of data, you may need to rewind, look at some of the graphs and so on and so forth. But I just thought that'd be interesting to you to highlight which are the biggest markets, how that's split between pre-off and in-play, and which ones are growing and declining. Pre-off and in-play as well. I think there's some interesting information in there. But the biggest takeout from the data that I saw was just that growth in greyhound racing, which I hadn't really picked up on last year. A lot of that grew massively last year from where it was before. So I think it's going to be time for me to have a look at that again and probably revisit it. Anyway, I hope that was interesting and useful for you.